All right, sixth period. Welcome to your first mini lecture. We'll try and make this quick. So what we have here is what we're covering for today, which is the Holocaust. We have what your objective is, as well as the state standards that apply. That's just for you to read. You should have already gotten these vocabulary words down, so we don't really have to, you don't have to write them down. They should already be written down. Each one of these we're gonna talk about in brief in the lecture. All right, so now here, there's a timer in the corner for 2 minutes. You go ahead, start writing. Copy down what you see on the screen. At the end of the 2 minutes, I'm gonna start explaining from the top all the way to the bottom. You can continue writing as I'm explaining. Do not pause the video. Okay, so a lot of this is going to be assumed that you recall the Holocaust from your world history class. But just real quickly as a recap so the Holocaust is the name given to the genocide of the Jewish people in Europe by Nazi Germany. So over a series of years, the Nazis systematically removed Jewish people from their society, first sort of metaphorically by denying them rights and privileges that are reserved for almost every other human being. And then they were physically removed from their homes. And then eventually they were taken out of cities and towns and put onto concentration and death camps. So I'm going to kind of be bouncing back and forth here between what's on the screen and what's not on the screen. So at the end of the Holocaust, 10 million people had died at the hands of the Nazis. The 10 million comes out to 6 million Jewish people. And then the remaining 4 million were political prisoners, the disabled, whether that was physically or mentally disabled, and then homosexuals were among those, the remaining 4 million. So we are talking a lot of people. I mean, a lot doesn't really kind of cover it. It's an astounding number of people were exterminated by the Nazis in Germany. And the whole idea for the Nazis was that they wanted to remove these people from society. They deemed them undesirable. So the idea was that they were going to create this pure white race. So they didn't want anyone who thought differently than they did. They didn't want anybody who had a disability because they thought that that might be passed on genetically. Same as with somebody who had a different sexual identity. And then the Jewish people were namely, they're because the Nazis were anti-Semitic, and they used the Jewish people as a scapegoat, meaning that they blamed the Jewish people for all the problems in Germany. So the first step was taking away their rights. And the method that the Nazis used was actually based loosely on Jim Crow laws in the southern United States. They kind of modeled off of how we treated African Americans after the Civil War, denying them liberties and rights through various legal means. So this first was within Germany, and we're going to get to the United States role on the next slide. But as the Nazis expanded, they took over more of Europe. That means that more Jewish people came under their control. And so eventually, they're going to have what's known as what they called their Jewish problem. But first, Jewish people, political prisoners, the disabled homosexuals, they were sent to concentration camps. And concentration camps are forced labor camps, or they're slave camps. People are imprisoned and made to work hard labor in order to produce items or to build things for the Nazi empire. So with millions of Jewish people under their control as they continue to expand throughout Europe, in order to stick with their flawed theory of trying to create like a pure white race or Aryan race, the Nazis have too many Jewish people that they can put to work. They have too many Jewish people that they want to have to even feed the minimal amount that they fed in concentration camps. So they decide that the best way to proceed about this is to create death camps where in mass, meaning so in large numbers, Jewish people were led into the normal route that they had planned on was into gas chambers. So could range from like 20 to 50. Some of the gas chambers, if you squeeze enough people in, could probably fit about 100, and they would kill them all together, and then they would burn their remains. And this is what the Allies, the United States, United States, Great Britain, and the Soviet Union come across as they're liberating these areas that had been under Nazi control. So what you have in terms of the pictures in front of us at the very bottom are men that were at a concentration camp. So they were starved to death, they were worked to death, and then of course the death camps were much worse. But both were a level of torture that no one should ever have to go through. All right, again, don't pause the video. You got 2 minutes to start writing, get as much done, and then you can continue writing as I'm explaining. Okay, so generally, and what we're really here this year to answer about, or to try and figure out about the Holocaust, is the United States role. So again, is you should have, in your previous year, gone over the different elements of the Holocaust. So the big question that's always asked is, when most students learn about the Holocaust, is why didn't anyone do anything to try and prevent this? And the United States plays a role in that. So the basic idea here is, for what was explained to the world after World War II was nobody knew it was going on. Well, that was a lie. The Germans were very transparent about what they were doing, or the Nazis in Germany were transparent. They were keeping records of all the people that they were exterminating and imprisoning. And part of that happened because the United States and other allied countries, so Great Britain, Canada, and even the Soviet Union, put restrictions not just on immigrants, but on Jewish people immigrating into the United States. There was a limited number that the United States would accept during the war, and the number of Jewish people that were allowed in on a yearly basis during the war was such a small number. No other ethnic group had that number attached to it. And this is in part because at that time, and unfortunately still even today, anti-Semitism is rampant. People who have a hatred for Jewish people and want to discriminate against them. So the United States was not absolved from this. And there were people high up in government during the war that were anti-Semitic, and that they controlled the quotas on who could be let in to the country based on their faith from Europe. So the United States was part of the problem, is that any Jewish person trying to escape Europe, if they were trying to, say, come here to the United States, most of the time they were turned away. They were not given the papers for entry. So they would have to find another country. And because anti-Semitism is not isolated to one country, they found that they were denied entry into other countries. Thus, they were trapped within the expanding Nazi empire. So, on top of that, once the United States was involved in the war and the United States was moving through Europe, there were opportunities that the United States had to actually disrupt these camps, these concentration and death camps, to cut the rail lines of the people being shipped in and out of these camps. But the United States decided against it, or the Allies decided against it as well, for various different reasons. But in the end, when you go back and you review it, the idea was that they did not prioritize the lives of the Jewish people and the 4 million other people in these camps over strategic value in trying to win the war. And so that's the justification the United States ends up giving as to why they didn't try and liberate these death camps and concentration camps earlier. So we did have in the United States what was called the War Refugee Board that took into special consideration people fleeing these countries, whether it was in Europe or over in Asia, as Japan's trying to expand as well. So these refugees that are trying to escape the tyranny of the Japanese Empire, the Italian Empire, and the Nazi Empire. But the War Refugee Board wasn't really good at what it was supposed to do, which was to screen these people and let them in. Instead, they used the process given to them to slow things down, and while they did save thousands of lives, there were still millions that were lost in Europe alone because they were too slow to react to what was going on. So In the end, the United States still was, as well as the Soviet Union and other Allied countries, were viewed as heroes because they were able to liberate these camps. They were able to get these prisoners like healthy again and trying to get them back on track. But there was still this underlying level of guilt that the United States and the Allied nations had. Soviet Union, not so much. So because they could have done something, whether it was allowing Jewish people to immigrate into their countries, or whether it was, trying to stop these concentration and death camps from operating. And again, these are large ethical and moral issues that could be debated back and forth for hours, and we don't have the time for that. But the United States and the Allies do have this sense of guilt that they did not respond quickly enough, particularly when they realized the full extent of what was going on and how many people were murdered by the Nazi government. So this creates the push to create a permanent Jewish country, and eventually they settle on a spot in the Holy Land where Jewish people had originated from, and that is what becomes what is today Israel. Later on, when we talk about the conflicts in the Middle East, we will get back onto this. And that is all that we have for today.